It's a great panel that we've set up with you. I think one thing to note that in 2020, New York City and our region was reclassified from a humid continental climate to a humid subtropical climate, right? So when we talk about climate change, I think it's also important to say that climate already has changed. And as climate change gets more severe, public agencies within the Northeast Corridor are at the forefront of the planning and efforts that need to happen around resilience and sustainability. We've got a great diverse panel to discuss region-specific strategies. Our panelists will share case studies, showcase some of the resilient strategies that they are all taking forward. And you will learn insight into some of the innovative policies, funding, and collaboration that they are all using to drive climate resilience initiatives forward. So my name is Vincent Lee. I'm a principal at Arup. I lead our civil and water engineering team. I'm also an adjunct professor at Cooper Union on resilient civil infrastructure. And what I'll do now is I'll pass along to our panelists to each introduce themselves. So I'll first ask Alan Cohn. He could give a brief introduction himself.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Alan Cohn with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. I'm a senior policy and science advisor in the Bureau of Sustainability. If you're not familiar with DEP, we provide drinking water, stormwater management, and wastewater services for all of New York City. My focus for the past 15 years actually started with climate resiliency, specifically trying to understand how climate change could affect our water supply, our stormwater systems, and our wastewater systems. And we've clearly seen those impacts increasing over the years, from Hurricane Sandy to Tropical Storm Ida to the drought we're in now, even with this rain. And so I'll talk today about the work that we're doing to understand the impacts of climate change on our systems and adapt.
That's great. Alexis.
Hi, I'm Alexis Taylor. I'm a vice president of climate resilience at New York City Economic Development Corporation. I'm very fortunate that our leadership believes that investment in climate resilience is an investment in our economy and critical to the vitality of our economy. And let's see, in my portfolio of projects, probably the largest project that I'm working on right now is filling the final gap in the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resilience portfolio of projects. I'm the director for the FIDI Seaport Link, which is basically the final gap running from the southern tip of Manhattan north to the Brooklyn Bridge.
Eric?
Hello, Eric McFarland, First Deputy Commissioner of Department of Design and Construction. Department of Design and Construction, we are responsible to basically build the city. We do work for 27 public agencies, with prior to DDC being formed in 1996, were responsible to their own capital programs throughout the city in all 5 boroughs, and of course with no coordination. So DDC mission is essentially to get the projects from all these different, almost 27 different agencies, plus the public library system, and coordinate all this work in all 5 boroughs. So our program is very large, and one of our a nice project that we did in this neighborhood is Times Square a few years back. For New York City DOT, so you can walk out and enjoy the view out there.
Angela.
I'm Angela Wong with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I'm a senior climate resiliency specialist with our Resilient and Sustainable Engineering unit. The engineering department works collaboratively with all of our 5 line departments, which actually own and manage the key infrastructure assets throughout the region. And those are ports, airports, tunnels, bridges, and terminals, the PATH system, and the World Trade Center complex. I've been working on climate change resiliency for over 13 years, and I'm very glad to be working on climate resiliency for our infrastructure in New York City.
Thank you all. I mean, so you could see, right, that's quite a range, right? We have New York City's water infrastructure, we have economic development, we've got citywide infrastructure, and our ports as well. So it's a wide range that each of these individuals are sort of leading on climate resilience. So I'll start with the first question around, because you're all working in different agencies, sort of like what are the new policies and innovations that you're pushing forward within your agency? So who would like to pick that question up?
I can go. The Port Authority has been working on climate change resiliency since 2008. It started with our update to the environmental policy that required the agency to mitigate climate change risks that would affect our operations and facilities. And since then, we've made a lot of progress, including working on projects after Hurricane Sandy. We've also issued climate resiliency design guidelines. And most recently, to advance our climate change agenda, we've been working on the climate risk assessment program. And the assessment program is proactive in looking across multi-hazards out until 2100.
As far as the DC is concerned, so we always were concerned about resiliency and sustainability, but really it came into focus after Sandy, where everybody realized, especially the administration, almost everybody realized that as a coastal city, we're vulnerable to climate change and sea level rise. And as a result, we are currently launching into, it's in progress right now. If you drive down the FDR, you can see that we are doing the East Side Coastal Resiliency, which is a 2.2 miles worth of protection, almost $2 billion worth of work that's going on right now. And as far as all the rest of our projects, our capital portfolio, we have a capital portfolio of almost $30 billion for project, almost 800 projects in all 5 boroughs, from planning all the way to construction. And each one of our projects we put it to determine the level of resiliency and sustainability that we can achieve using the Envision rating system for the civil work. For the architectural work, of course, we use LEED was already a commonly used LEED system, but for the horizontal stuff, infrastructure, what we call the infrastructure, we basically put a lot of emphasis on the Envision rating system so that we can see exactly how, and we try to achieve at least a gold rating system to make sure that all our projects are sustainable and resilient.
Yeah, Alan?
Sure. So, similar story that, Hurricane Sandy was a catalyst, but we recognized even back then that the next storm won't look like the last. And, unfortunately, when we did have Tropical Storm Ida, we saw that rain events are an extreme risk as well. So more and more, there's a movement towards multi-hazard planning. And, we are pretty far along when it comes to retrofits, for example, of our wastewater facilities, floodproofing. So the keeping water out is pretty mainstreamed into what we're doing. Every time we retrofit a pump for whatever purpose, it goes through the climate resiliency design guidelines and SOPs and has to produce, a resiliency approach. But more and more, the drainage system retrofits are not as simple. This year we released 2024 stormwater analysis, which looks at where we have persistent flooding or potential for flooding in the future, and puts forth the plan to adapt the system to increase the size of our infrastructure. But there's limits to what we can do with that as well. So we, besides increasing pipe size and upgrading the sewers where feasible, we're mixing green and gray infrastructure. Green infrastructure was rain gardens and projects that are meant to reduce pressure on the sewer. But increasingly, we have to look above the surface and what we can do for these larger rain events. We have what's called our Cloudburst program, which is an evolution of the green infrastructure program. We've received or will be receiving hopefully over $200 million from FEMA for flood reduction from green infrastructure. So it's really looking, how we can enhance, again, multiple benefits from our investments and how we can leverage federal funding to offset impacts to ratepayers.
When I talk to like other cities, they're really impressed about all the work that New York does, and I think a lot of this happens with policies that each of our panelists have just described. So I was just curious around, once you set the policy, and some of you talked about it, right? You have the guidelines that you've respectively have worked through with your agencies, trying to use the Envision framework. But then how do you standardize and design for future climate so that it's consistent across projects, right? Because most of us, those of us that are engineers in the room, we're designing for, using historic data, right? Whether it's temperature or rainfall. So how do we take that next leap? And what are we doing to ensure that we're thinking about sea level rise, future flood risk, and also the changing climate around rainfall and temperatures?
So we always start with NPCC data. We're very fortunate to have a dedicated New York City panel on climate change. And they really set the standard citywide for the sea level rise projections, which then, in the case of Lower Manhattan projects, we're then building to that standard in FIDI and the Battery through 2100 sea level rise. Then it does become a question of coastal storm surge projection. And obviously there are different design flood elevations and different design storms that you can go to or design to. A lot of that has to do with kind of the geography and circumstance of each of the projects and funding. Sometimes they are funding constrained. But, for the most part, we continue to push that as each project comes online, it's even more ambitious in terms of how forward-looking it is. And I will just say, not only in terms of flooding, but in the case of FIDI Seaport, we're really reimagining a 21st century waterfront there. So it's not just a coastal resilience project. It also encompasses the nation's busiest ferry terminal, the Staten Island Ferry, which is a critical lifeline to everyone getting to their jobs in Lower Manhattan. That needs to be elevated to protect against sea level rise and storm surge. And our NYC ferry hub at Wall Street. And, as I said, it's not just a climate resilience project. We're also planning for the future electrification of those large kind of maritime transportation assets, knowing that as a policy, the city is compelled to kind of convert to electric. We're also building the facilities that can receive that and support that electrification.
And one of the challenges that we have in New York City is that it's an old city, and we are basically trying to transform, do all these transformative changes in a dense urban environment. And it is not as simple as, the challenge is huge. And one of the things that, especially the Department of Design and Construction, again, one part of this, since we do projects for all these different agencies who have different mission, is that we basically we are advocating for all these transformative changes. And remember now, we basically we are a city agency, so we are restricted by certain rules and regulations that we cannot do anything we like. And so and some of the changes that we want to implement requires legislative approval. We have to go to Albany to get the authorization to actually proceed. So last year we finally got, recently the government finally signed the design build legislation, the CM bill, CM at risk, and other things. And these are things that we've been advocating for to actually improve the delivery of projects in the city and to facilitate that. So that is one of the key things that, and this year we're going back to Albany to actually do for a big push. We basically are advocating for DDC, Department of Design and Construction, who is the the chief design and construction design and construction manager for the public work in the city of New York to become an authority. And that will give us a flexibility to implement a lot of the modern techniques that everybody uses, all the states, all the private industry, to actually accelerate projects and deliver projects faster and more efficiently.
No, that's great there, Eric. Alexis, you mentioned funding. Eric, you talked about procurement. So given the urgency of climate change and the things that we need to work in, future funding might be in question. We heard a great talk early just before this about from USDOT. What are some of your agencies doing to address the uncertainty around funding, challenges around procurement, to ensure that we keep the momentum going with all the work you're doing? So maybe Alexis, you can start.
Yeah, so certainly, we've had to rethink some of our strategy, particularly around discretionary federal funding that will be going to resilience projects. I will say that as a city, we have been advocating very strongly for a formula-based funding to go towards resilience. That would be more like how the FTA gives out non-discretionary formula-based funding. A much better policy for pipeline of projects that you can really plan for, rather than having to wait for an influx of a discretionary grant. The other thing that we're really focused on, and the speaker that was previous to ours kind of set us up for this, which is since there's not a huge bucket of resilience funding, BRIC is capped at $50 million. We've really been positioning a lot of the assets in our overall coastal resilience portfolio as being eligible as primarily a transportation project with coastal resilience integrated into the design. And so that's really opened up a whole nother stream of FTA funding, MARAD, everything else. So we've really been able to identify other streams and sources that are hopefully less likely to kind of be targeted as discretionary or non-essential.
And just pick up on that because I think that's an interesting opportunity. Also, when my mind automatically on this topic goes to more decentralized solutions. Of course, we're always working on larger projects, which we're going to, again, have to continue. We're unique as a water utility. We'll fund them with water rates. Hopefully, we continue to receive federal funding so it can offset impacts to our ratepayers. But there's an opportunity, working, whether it's through, I don't know a lot about this, but DOT funding to incorporate some of those stormwater solutions so we can, leverage roads projects, leverage parks projects. Private developments, is another very big opportunity. We have a unified stormwater rule, which requires properties to implement stormwater management practices on site. And increasingly, I see it as an all hands on deck approach to climate resiliency, where every single investment, whether it's, the city's centralized infrastructure, is optimized and resilient. And we're seeking those investments through unique and creative mechanisms wherever we can.
It's great.
And given the urgency of climate change, in addition to looking for funding, we've been thinking a lot about strategic planning because there will be a lot of climate change risks and the risks will continue to grow over time. So we need to prioritize and be strategic on what are the highest priority risks that we need to address first. We're doing that through the climate risk assessment, where we are looking at our assets and our assets as an entire system to understand where the weak points are, so that if one asset fails, there could be cascading impacts across the entire network. And so that emphasizes the importance of protecting that single asset, like a substation, which can affect the operations of hundreds of other downstream assets. So we've been working on the climate risk assessment to then output strategic mitigation projects to address those highest priority risks. And the overall climate risk assessment program is designed to directly inform the capital planning process. The Port Authority has a 10-year capital plan. So if we identify a climate risk that needs to be addressed by the 2040s based on the projections, we need to be talking about that capital project now and making sure that it's in the capital plan.
Thanks, Angela. Eric, you mentioned design build and sort of a shift in that direction, and that will help, right, with the urgency, with getting projects delivered. How has that been going for DDC? Because that is a new program over the last couple of years.
It's been going very well, especially because initially we had the authorization for the boat-based jail. I don't know if you ever heard about this. With the closing of Rikers, they intend to put the jail in each borough. Manhattan, Bronx, I don't think I understand that, but Bronx, Queens, and Manhattan. And all these projects are in construction right now. They say it's an $8 billion total budgeted projects, set of projects. And that's all of this is being done as a design build program. In addition to that, we have an additional, almost 9 additional, because we started initiated that program before we got full authorization to actually do this. So we had 9 pilot projects that are going on for throughout on our program, and it's almost $1 billion worth of work that we have identified as design build. Right now, we just got Governor last month or this month signed the progressive design build, which we think that's the only thing way we can do the horizontal work, the street work, because you need to understand the scope of work before you can put a price on it. So we were waiting for a progressive design build, and we got it. So we're going to attack a particular area of the city that's very vulnerable to flooding, which is the Southeast Queens area. Almost a $3 billion program where in order to actually complete that project, you actually have to build the outlets. And if we start, and the way a sewer construction is done, you start from outlet and you move up. So if people up will be waiting for more than 10 years for relief if we do it like a design bid build. So we intend to use progressive design build to actually accelerate this process so we can give relief to this area in particular.
That's great. Thanks, Eric. So I think we're all in a place where, and this has been a sprint of a panel, but we're all in a place where all the work that we're all doing now is going to have multi-generational impact, right? As it relates to climate resiliency. So I'd like to ask each panelist to share on a positive side, right? What is the program or project that you're most proud of or inspires you the most? And something that maybe the audience can take back and say, hey, this is the type of thing I can take back to my own work. So maybe I'll start with Angela.
Sure. I'm most excited to see where the results of the climate risk assessment can take us in terms of informing better decision making. It's definitely not as sexy as a mega resilience project, but I think a lot of the audience members could take this back in terms of making smarter climate-informed decision-making processes. So for example, we have the climate resiliency design guidelines already, which integrate climate change projections into our project design. The climate risk assessment will also output very valuable asset data that we can incorporate back into our enterprise asset management system. We're working with our enterprise risk management group to show them the data that we have that they can provide to underwriters to show how we're being proactive against property damages. And then we also have very valuable data on electrical and mechanical assets from the climate risk assessment that we can fold back into our decarbonization and electrification efforts. So there's a whole approach to resiliency across an entire organization, across our entire organization.
Eric.
All right. So I'm happy to report that we have substantially completed the first part of the East Side Coastal Resiliency job, which is from 25th Street to 15th Street. And it's almost over 3,500 linear feet of wall with 11 gates and about 160 I believe $160 million, and it came on time and on budget. So, in fact, below budget. I think we save about we have almost $3 million left. The rest of the program will be done in 2026. The rest of the $2 billion from 15th Street all the way to Brooklyn Bridge, past the Brooklyn Bridge. And when that system is complete, then the entire system of protection for that side of Manhattan will be completed. It will be turned over to DEP, who's going to manage the operation.
That's great. It's exciting to see that. I mean, that's going to transform Lower East Side for sure in so many different ways. Thank you. Alexis?
Yeah, I'm going to speak about a project actually across the Hudson River in Hoboken, New Jersey. The Rebuild by Design Hoboken project, which I worked on for 8 years. The amazing thing is, at its earliest conception, it was really more of a framework and a strategic approach called Resist, Delay, Store, Discharge. So a way to deal with both the coastal storm surge through a resist levee or flood wall, delay and store, which were coordinated efforts for green infrastructure, policies to slow water down, and then rebuilding large parks with cisterns underneath that could hold the water until the tides were lower, and then pump stations could be adequately timed to discharge the water. It was an amazing effort across city, state, and federal agencies. And allowed that four-pronged approach actually allowed everyone to be very mission-driven in terms of what piece they were responsible for. So I worked for the state of New Jersey, building the costliest part, which is the resist structure. And then the city really set out in a very coordinated effort to implement the resist delay, the delay, store, and discharge. And that project is now under construction. It was brought to construction by AECOM, and it really remains kind of a gold standard of how you can address multiple climate risks all at once.
Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, I mean, Hoboken's become a really great example of how you can think about water management creatively in public space. But thanks. And Alan?
Yeah, and I agree with that. Hoboken's a great model for actually more what we can be doing in New York City, especially with like the Resilient City Park and parks that in public space that have storage and are able to flood in these more extreme events. And that's the project I'm most proud of is our Cloudburst program, which again is moving in that direction. Our first pilot project, one of many projects, a $400 million program now, is at South Jamaica Houses. It's a series of retention areas, a basketball court that has storage under it, but is also designed to flood in a more extreme rain event. And I think that's just a microcosm for the additional opportunities that we have.
That's great. And the Cloudburst program, I mean, requires so many agencies to collaborate in order to make those happen. So it's really great to see that move forward in New York. Okay, so that concludes our panel. Wow, that really was a sprint. I just want to thank Ken for pulling the panel together. Thank you all for your time, and let's give a hand to our panelists. Thank you.